As of this video's publishing date, it will have been 2 years and change since the Metal Gear franchise concluded for me. Now, that's not to say that it isn't still around. As of November 23rd, 2017, the next installment is set for February 2018 under the title Metal Gear Survive. If you chose to watch this video, chances are you already know why I claimed that Metal Gear has already concluded. But if you are new to the series or simply unaware, this is largely why I've decided to bring the series into review as a recollection and celebration of the series fans originally fell in love with, not the incarnation the series is currently operating as. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning, prefaced by a short history lesson. The creator of the Metal Gear franchise, Hideo Kojima, is a man that the gaming industry can easily claim as one of its premier auteurs in the entire medium. He is largely responsible for most of the madness that is Metal Gear, and love him or hate him, this hobby could use a lot more faces like him. A creator with a vision all their own instead of lifeless, focus-tested, and cookie-cutter games with an absence of imagination or voice all of their own. Kojima has had varying levels of hands-on time with the series, but his unique sense of direction and influence is felt on most of the mainline canon games in the timeline, as I largely won't be covering the spin-offs. This is mainly because I actually haven't played many of the non-canon titles, but I can vouch for Ghost Babel somewhat, and the Twin Snakes in particular. They're pretty fun alternate experiences if you can get your hands on them. In total, there are 10 mainline canon Metal Gear games, technically 10 if you want to lump both parts of Metal Gear Solid 5 into the combined full game you know it was really meant to be, but I digress. This means yes, I do consider parts of Portable Ops canon, even if the fine details are largely under a vague fever dream classification, and the Kojima-directed sequels only vaguely allude to them beyond a few critical plot points, and I fully consider Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance canon, since it doesn't really contradict anything, being the furthest along in the timeline, and mainly because I really like that game. Metal Gear, Solid Snake, Metal Gear Solid, Sons of Liberty, Snake Eater, Portable Ops, Guns of the Patriots, Peace Walker, Revengeance, Ground Zeroes, and The Phantom Pain are the only games that matter to me and many other fans as far as I'm concerned when it comes to true canon. These games had Kojima's influence in some way, shape, or form, and going forward, it is a series that can't possibly be the same without him at the helm. This series is full of details, major and minor, that are so in-your-face and subtle that it's a shame the series is being puppeteered without the man who gave it its heart and soul for better and worse. But enough lamenting. I'm here to celebrate this series, and I do so with the original game that started it all. As usual, spoilers will be in effect towards the latter half of the video for those who aren't aware of the game's biggest plot twist. Metal Gear was originally released in 1987 for the MSX2 computer system, but for the purposes of this review and for most who have access to the game, everything from here on will reference the updated port version released in the Metal Gear Solid HD Collection for PlayStation 3, as an extra feature in Metal Gear Solid 3's Subsistence re-release. The NES game that some of us had also played is not considered canon, and it won't be covered here. Given how the game received an updated localization to better fit in line with what the series became, alongside tweaked gameplay, it's a great place to begin. By beginning the game with no weapons, Snake only has his fists to get out of conflicts with armed guards, until he can secure firearms of his own. Add to the fact his health is halved when you begin with ammunition severely limited from the start, and you are often outgunned in every encounter, Metal Gear is very much suggesting with various degrees of subtlety that you are not meant to go in guns blazing Rambo style if you want to survive for long. All these factors come together to encourage a more methodical approach to the action genre. The games are generally doable with various methods and playstyle, though the series tends to reward the cautious and stealthy player more than the trigger-happy assassin. The original Metal Gear is an interesting middle ground. Solid Snake is only able to move in the 4 cardinal directions in this initial game, at one set speed, though you do have some leeway because of this limitation. While the enemies have weapons with longer reach and more subtle trajectories than Snake, it is possible to abuse the direct line of sight to gain advantages in other areas. For example, you can approach an enemy by abusing the game systems. By staying just out of their line of sight, this allows you to punch out guards who by all rights should normally see you, but the game registers them as blind because of its own rules. In general, the AI in the franchise isn't terribly bright, but they do follow set patterns, which does help in giving the player a chance to formulate a strategy, be it running past danger or taking out a room one foe at a time. This isn't a complaint though, as good AI can often be somewhat predictable. See Mark Brown's excellent video on the subject he did for Game Maker's Toolkit in the description below. In short summary, good AI should follow scripts and not be completely autonomous or random, as the player should be able to recognize a pattern to appropriately think up a way to act upon it. Plus, when you do get spotted, the odds are wildly against you, with multiple enemies able to flood a screen with weapons that are way more accurate than yours to discourage getting caught very often. Speaking of, might as well address the alert system here. If an enemy sees you and one exclamation point shows up, only those on your current screen will attack, and you can end the state of alert if you either defeat all hostiles on screen or simply exit the immediate area. 2 exclamation points will summon reinforcements from off-screen, and can only be lifted if you enter a different building, change floors, or keep defeating enemy soldiers until they're all eliminated, however the game decides that. This higher alert is also triggered when Snake fires a weapon without a silencer, discouraging the player from unnecessarily picking fights. Besides guards, security cameras are set up to give the iconic cardboard box a chance to shine. Sensors and pitfall traps are also other obstacles littered around Outer Heaven, as well as rooms filled with poisonous gas and electrified floors with and without control panels. Various equipment take on a Zelda and Metroid-like quality, and that your inventory doubles as your weapons and exploration tools. Some, like the gas mask, are self-explanatory and aid in surviving specific obstacles, while others are situational for progress, like the parachute. You can punch walls to listen for strange noises to then blow up with plastic explosives a la Zelda, use the thermal goggles to spot infrared sensors, or even use your cigarettes instead if you lack the goggles. This series would get really good at presenting and rewarding creative usage of the various options they present you with to solve any given situation, but it's largely straightforward in this inaugural title. That being said, Metal Gear can be esoteric at the best of times, and there are a few moments where getting help shouldn't be frowned upon here. For the most part, it plays pretty decently. General flow of gameplay is using the binoculars to check for enemies, finding a way to either neutralize or sneak past enemies and traps, and gathering items by systematically checking doors with varying levels of security cards around Outer Heaven. But every once in a while, there's a situation that isn't made clear in-game and is very much a "god dang it" moment, to use TV tropes lingo. There are walls with hidden entrances that can be blown up Zelda-style with plastic explosives, but the game isn't terribly explicit about it beyond a few hints, similar to the original Metroid game on the NES. It's a lot of trial and error without a guide, especially in a few maze-like areas. Also, I have to point out how weird it is to actually kill guard dogs by straight up shooting them. It's just kind of weird knowing how the series will eventually end up very anti-animal cruelty later on. I don't know, it's just one of those first game things, kind of like no crawling. That's really weird to a fan. To assist Snake is a radio that gives situational advice based on the grid he's occupying. You have access to Snake's CO Big Boss for general advice, Kyle Schneider, who is a drafted architect turned resistance leader in Outer Heaven, who gives weapon-based hints, Jennifer, a resistance member disguised as medical personnel, who acts as a skill check regarding POWs, and positive punk rock vocalist Diane, who identifies traps and weapon systems alongside boss weaknesses. Together they make up the 4 frequencies for the transceiver, and it's honestly something you're likely to ignore unless you get a call from them the first time you enter a new area, or if you honestly get stuck and hope the game will give you a decent hint. It's true that Big Boss gives general hints and often suggests Schneider's advice for specific obstacles, but the game itself doesn't actually give you Schneider's frequency. Without a guide of said frequencies or a bit of trial and error for a very patient person, a player may never realize he's an option to begin with and will remain confused at this unseen Schneider character. In fact, all the support is unseen in-game, where in every other entry, portraits are given to the participants. Again, a really minor thing. Adding to that, when Snake reaches Building 2 of Outer Heaven, all but Jennifer will change their frequencies. Maybe to just annoy players? It's things like these that the series uses to keep players on their toes, especially in earlier releases. Of particular note, a trio of infamous examples are immortalized in Metal Gear Solid, but we'll get to that in due time. Despite a few vague oddities, Metal Gear is a decently direct 8-bit game that plays like an homage to 80s action films. Character progression is tied to both prisoners of war and bosses, the former an absolute necessity to beat the game. For every 5 hostages you save, Snake's rank goes up by 1 star, each one increasing both his health and ammo capacity. The maximum 4 stars are required to contact Jennifer so she can unlock a weapon stash for a mini-boss fight of sorts later on, and to have enough ammunition to beat the various bosses themselves, as you are severely limited with few options to replenish your amount if you run out. Add to that bosses regenerate health if you leave their area, and it's easier to sometimes simply let yourself be killed and restart rather than running around for more ammo in some situations just to save time. Mind you, I gave more insight into the characters and plot just now of Metal Gear than the game actually does itself. A good portion of this information is from the relatively obscure Metal Gear Solid 4 database interactive encyclopedia on the PS3. Some of the game's events are vital to the progression and motivations of characters throughout its sequels and prequels, but in-game it's played as a somewhat standard action fare. This is largely an element of Metal Gear being limited as an 8-bit game, so Metal Gear Solid tweaking a few details here and there is largely given a pass by many fans, myself included, which is why I'm kind of glossing over a lot of plot points until I get to later games. This whole comparison thing I'm doing works much better when I start covering other sequels. The game moves along at a swift pace as well. I was able to record this footage in just under 4 hours, and I did get a few game overs as I readjusted to the controls and got regularly punished for overconfidence and negligence when it came to taking damage. Kind of a bad habit of mine, but at least I'm honest about it. A guide is recommended for frequencies, and maybe for a map if you want to speed up your progression and eliminate some guesswork. The first installment doesn't have any way to view where you've been beyond the buildings and floors when using elevators, so it's your call if you want to rely on your memory or just have a map in front of you. Now for a brief rundown of the breezy gameplay. Your equipment are staples of the series: binoculars, cigarettes, access cards, a gas mask, rations, a mine detector, infrared goggles. Every basic mainstay of the series is present here. While your weapons are only 7 in number, they each have their own use and speciality, from the initial handgun that can be fitted with a suppressor, plastic bombs, rocket and grenade launchers, landmines, a machine gun, and a remote-controlled missile. Each has their own use, though some are definitely more useful than others. As stated earlier, you are to systematically search Outer Heaven for access keys that get you further into the base, to rescue POWs, both resistance and plot-related support characters, while also procuring most equipment and avoiding detection to discover what Metal Gear actually is and to put a stop to it. It's not too much of a threat if you're a methodical player, but I admit my recklessness does get me into more alert phases than I likely should accrue. But Metal Gear has always been an action game with stealth elements, and the original MSX2 game is no exception. Beginning a grand tradition of boss fights are a relatively simple ensemble of obstacles, at least compared to the legendary adversaries the series will be infamous for later on. Since the story isn't as quite a big focus in this game, I won't bother elaborating on the backstories, not that they have much depth to begin with, and will instead continue just to spoil the heck out of this game. Shopmaker is the first real boss Solid Snake runs across after successfully getting captured to gain access to the underground prison. He's basically a more relentless regular mercenary, kind of a theme in this game, that seems tougher than he actually is due in part to his wide-reaching riot gun and Snake's disarmed state when you first initiate the battle. This is one of the game's semi-esoteric moments, as you do need to punch a door to break it down to access your gear. You aren't trained to punch doors prior to this moment, so this is an area I can imagine many newcomers getting a little salty over after a couple deaths. While I'm on the subject of nitpicks though, having to equip each of the 8 specific card keys for every door that only takes its corresponding card quickly becomes very annoying after a while. I realize this was partially inspired by Dawn of the Dead and as a form of urgency and dread, according to Kojima, but this issue is dealt with as the formula improves in its sequels. Admittedly a nitpick, but it is something this first game does that does irk me a bit on replays. Returning to Shopmaker. We'd get a much more interesting and fascinating warden previously in the Spetsnaz in Metal Gear Solid, but here boss fights are more upgraded regular enemies with higher rates of fire and ability, which is fine for this first game. It eases you into the series kinda well when looking at what they improved upon later, which is kinda what I'm doing. Machine Gun Kid is exactly what it says on the tin, and seems intimidating if you simply don't blitzkrieg him and go to town if you're willing to tank a few shots and abuse your invulnerability time. The Hind D is likewise an impressive-looking foe until you learn you can lob grenades into its stationary cockpit. A tank was used in the desert area between Outer Heaven's buildings that is dispatched by the careful timing and laying of mines. A repeat performance of the grenade launcher will make short work of a converted insta-kill bulldozer to round out the mechanical bosses, but you do need to be on point with your aiming and quick on the trigger if you don't want a swift game over. I've played the game a handful of times, and I still got killed on this most recent run. To finish off the hired mercs under Outer Heaven's employ, Fire Trooper is a bare-bones fight between Snake and a flamethrower-wielding German in an underground area, an idea the series will revisit in a very awesome prequel. Dr. Madnar, under instructions from Outer Heaven, developed 2 mini-bosses in the form of the AI Bloody Brad cybernoid things? They're fast and hit hard, and are invulnerable to all but the rocket launcher you get late in the game, once you convince Jennifer you're a stand-up soldier with a 4-star rank from 20+ rescues. Howard the Duck homage, Dirty Duck, represents the final challenge before the endgame, a boomerang-wielding coward who fights behind 3 POWs, one of them being Jennifer's brother. This is probably the most interesting boss fight in the game, as killing any POW during the game results in an immediate loss of rank, so caution is heavily advised. In addition, there's also a pit trap located directly in front of the human shields, so careful aiming is needed here if you want to retain all the health and ammo you've acquired up until this point. Right, small nitpicking again, since some of those pitfall traps are evil and can sometimes get you if you aren't acutely aware of the placements in-game and how it decides if you aren't sufficiently far enough from one. Rant over. A brief summary of the story up to this point. Solid Snake successfully infiltrates Outer Heaven and had gotten captured to speak with Foxhound veteran Gray Fox. Snake was told from Fox that Metal Gear was a bipedal walking battle tank that can fire nuclear weapons from any terrain, and that he should then find the also captured Dr. Madnar, the creator of the TX-55 Metal Gear prototype, and discover how to destroy it for good. When Snake reaches the father of robotics after dealing with the decoy, Snake learns that Madnar's daughter Ellen is also imprisoned within the base and must rescue her before his cooperation is assured. After reaching her and learning of her father's forced work for Outer Heaven, Snake is told of the specific order of plastic explosives needed to destroy Metal Gear. Don't ask, I don't know how this works either. From there, it's a varied series of backtracking and item gathering hunts in order to reach Metal Gear TX-55 in the 100th floor of the basement of Building 3. Around that approach, Big Boss begins to give Snake very suspect advice, many of which lead you into traps and setbacks if you heed his words. Eventually, Schneider will try to inform you of Outer Heaven's legendary mercenary founder before being cut off. Approaching Metal Gear and placing the 16 sequence pattern on both legs, another nitpick, the final placement is not told to the player, so just to give you one more middle finger because you made it this far, and this is also after Big Boss told you to straight up shut off your system, so While successfully dodging dual laser cameras will trigger a countdown. This leads Snake to discover the true mastermind of the fortified fortress, Big Boss himself. This twist is the backbone of the entire series, to the point where it doesn't really seem like a twist given hindsight or almost any exposure to the rest of the franchise. Either way, it must have been a trip back in 1987. The fight itself isn't anything special, but the countdown does keep you on your toes to not dilly-dally, especially if you didn't catch the message Jennifer's brother can give you after the Dirty Duck fight. Once you defeat Big Boss, you have a choice of 3 stairs to leave from, and 2 are dead ends meant to eat up your time and punish you because this is the 80s and that's kinda how some games rolled back then. To be clear, as the video shows, there is one staircase that is the very much correct path, though you can do this without the knowledge of the correct path if you are quick with your traitorous CO. Once Snake reaches the surface, he books it right as Outer Heaven seemingly self-destructs, ending Operation Intrude N313 as, I guess, a success. Metal Gear as a whole is an interesting time capsule at what the stealth genre looked like in its infancy. It's a bit rough around the edges and does suffer a bit in its vagueness at times, but the structure is sound and gave us a sneak peek into the juggernaut of story and gameplay the series would be renowned for. The game also looks nice, and the music, while repetitive, is catchy, improves 8-bit technology, really brought out some of the catchiest chiptunes ever made. I still don't know who Tara is, or Tara, but their theme is an earworm. It's a pretty okay example of Kojima's trademark quirks as well, as the game gives you weapons but actively punishes you for being reckless with them, a story that's more involved than first meets the eye, and gameplay with various small touches that are easier to appreciate in hindsight. For instance, using the machine gun actually sprays your bullets around to slightly imitate the unwieldy nature of the actual weapon. That's a cool touch for a top-down game from 1987. Definitely a recommendation if you have the patience for 8-bit game design, given the caveat you need to have a copy of some version of MGS3 that includes it. At least for the good version. And if that's the case, you likely have access to its sequel, which is a pretty fantastic entry, but I am getting ahead of myself. No 2-for-1 retrospective this time. I definitely want to devote an entire video for Metal Gear 2 in the coming weeks, as much as that gives away my opinion on it. And that basically covers the original Metal Gear. This is going up right after some Thanksgiving food prep, so I'm tired and hungry at the same time. But canon Metal Gear is always something I can gush about for hours on end, and is definitely worth my effort. Granted, the later games are going to push these videos even longer than I already make them. I believe my passion for the games definitely shines through. I mean, I wouldn't do a 20+ minute video on a simple 8-bit game if I didn't want to, right? All 15 of you subscribers may not even care about Metal Gear, but I like you anyways for sticking around. But given how this goes out on Black Friday 2017, I hope everyone has had a great weekend, Thanksgiving or otherwise. Or if you're from the future, I hope you're having a good day, period. I'm likely full of ham and pumpkin pie and my specific family recipe for potato salad as this goes out. I hope you all spent time with friends, family, and or loved ones, and hope you enjoyed your time here if you watched the full video. I seriously need a good game to play after the Star Wars EA Battlefront 2 loot box fiasco and the whole net neutrality thing. May history prove them both as an exploitative gambling scheme and ridiculous and oppressive censorship respectively, and may both be banished to another dimension where they belong. I'm likely enjoying time with family playing Super Mario Odyssey and Animal Crossing Pocket Camp between the festivities and digesting my ham, because ham is better than turkey. So I will likely have my Super Mario NES review combo script thing being edited right now over the weekend, and will probably have the video up in early December to celebrate the plumber's phenomenal new Switch game. Seriously, Odyssey is a blast to play. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you next time.